Have you ever woken up to the sound of your alarm, felt that immediate sense of dread, and then asked yourself, what's the point of getting out of bed today? You drag yourself through the motions, brushing your teeth, making coffee, all while feeling this overwhelming sense of heaviness, like your body is fighting against every move. Society tells us this is laziness or a lack of willpower. But what if I told you that this feeling of unmotivation isn't a character flaw? What if it's actually your soul's way of protecting you from paths that don't align with your true purpose? This perspective might completely transform how you view those days when you simply can't bring yourself to be productive. When you feel unmotivated, our culture immediately labels it as procrastination or laziness. We're taught to push through, to hustle harder. But there's a profound wisdom in these feelings that most people never recognize. That heaviness you feel isn't random. It's a sophisticated inner guidance system trying to communicate something important. Today, I want to share how understanding this through the lens of Kantian philosophy can completely transform your relationship with motivation and reveal the hidden message your soul is trying to convey. At the core of this experience is what the great philosopher Immanuel Kant would call a categorical imperative, an inner moral law that guides us toward authentic action. Think of motivation like water. It flows naturally when it's aligned with your true path, but becomes stagnant when forced in directions that contradict your deeper values. This feeling of heaviness, this resistance you experience, is actually a physical manifestation of your deeper self, recognizing a misalignment between what you think you should do and what your authentic self is drawn to do. It's as if your body is physically embodying Kant's moral philosophy, refusing to treat your actions as merely means to an end, but insisting they connect to something more meaningful. Now, I want to explore the 5 types of unmotivation that Kant's philosophy helps us understand. The first is what I call value misalignment resistance. This type emerges when what you're attempting to do fundamentally contradicts your core values. Perhaps you're working at a company whose practices you find ethically questionable, or pursuing a career path to please others rather than fulfill your own sense of purpose. The heaviness you feel isn't laziness. It's your soul's integrity refusing to violate its own moral code. This resistance manifests as an almost physical heaviness in your body, particularly around your chest area. Psychologically, your mind creates endless distractions to prevent you from moving forward. The wisdom here isn't to force yourself through, but to recognize that this type of unmotivation is protecting your moral integrity. Kant would argue that this feeling is your autonomy, asserting itself against actions that would compromise your dignity as a rational being. The second type is intuitive warning resistance. This occurs when your deeper wisdom senses danger or negative outcomes that your conscious mind hasn't yet recognized. Maybe you're pursuing a project that seems logical, but your soul can perceive hidden pitfalls. This manifests as a nagging sense of unease or anxiety when thinking about the task. You might find yourself making small mistakes or forgetting important details, not because you're incompetent, but because your intuitive mind is creating roadblocks to protect you. Psychologically, you experience racing thoughts and an inability to focus. The wisdom here is to recognize that this form of unmotivation is your inner guidance system, trying to protect you from potentially harmful situations. Kant would see this as the faculty of judgment, operating from an intuitive, rather than purely rational level, what he might call a reflective, rather than determinant judgment. The third type is soul purpose redirection. This form of unmotivation arises when you're being called toward your true path, but are still investing energy in directions that no longer serve your growth. You feel intensely motivated toward certain unexpected activities, but completely unmotivated toward ones that used to engage you. Physically, you might feel energized when thinking about the new direction, but exhausted when forcing yourself to stick with the old path. Psychologically, you experience a sense of aliveness and flow when exploring new interests, contrasted with emptiness in former pursuits. The message here isn't that you're inconsistent, but that you're evolving, and your soul is redirecting your energy toward your next phase of growth. Kant might interpret this as the teleological purpose of your being unfolding itself, the final cause of your existence pulling you toward its realization. The fourth type I call rest and integration requirement. This unmotivation appears when you've been overexerting yourself and need time to process experiences and learnings. Our productivity-obsessed culture rarely honors this natural rhythm, but it's essential. This type manifests as complete mental fatigue, an inability to generate new ideas, and sometimes even physical symptoms like headaches or muscle tension. Psychologically, you might experience brain fog or memory issues. The wisdom here is understanding that periods of apparent unmotivation are actually vital integration phases where your unconscious mind is working to synthesize experiences. Kant would recognize this as the necessary synthesis of experiences that forms the basis of knowledge, what he termed the transcendental unity of apperception, where disconnected experiences are unified into coherent understanding. The fifth and perhaps deepest form is authentic freedom protection. This emerges when you're being coerced, either externally or by your own internalized shoulds, into actions that contradict your autonomous nature. This isn't about avoiding difficult things, but about honoring your status as a free being who must act from authentic choice rather than compulsion. This manifests as a profound sense of rebellion or resistance against pressure. Physically, you might feel constriction in your throat or tightness in your shoulders. Psychologically, even thinking about the task creates a feeling of being trapped. The message isn't that you're rebellious, but that your soul deeply values authentic freedom and resists anything that threatens it. This aligns perfectly with Kant's central philosophical concern, that human dignity is rooted in autonomy, our capacity to give ourselves our own law rather than merely following external commands. What connects all these forms of unmotivation? They all point to a central question that Kant himself might have posed. Are you living authentically according to universal principles you could will for all humanity? Or are you compromising your dignity as a rational, autonomous being? I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. What form of unmotivation resonates most with your current experience? Share below with the phrase, "My soul might be protecting me from..." And I'm beginning to understand that your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to make sense of their own journey. Now, let's explore a practical framework for working with these different forms of unmotivation. The first step is to approach your unmotivation with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of forcing yourself to push through, pause and ask, "What is this feeling trying to tell me?" Pay attention to exactly when and where you feel resistance. Is it toward a specific project, person, or environment? Next, examine the quality of the unmotivation. Does it feel like exhaustion, rebellion, or perhaps a pull toward something different? The specific quality offers important clues about which type you're experiencing. Once you've identified the type, you can respond appropriately. For value misalignment, the answer might be to reassess your commitment to activities that conflict with your deeper values. For intuitive warning, slow down and look more carefully for hidden pitfalls in your path. For soul purpose redirection, allow yourself to explore new interests, even if they seem impractical at first. For rest and integration requirement, give yourself permission to rest without guilt. And for authentic freedom protection, look for ways to reclaim your sense of choice, even within necessary responsibilities. Here are some reflective questions to ask yourself. If this unmotivation were a messenger, what would it be trying to tell me? What happens in my body when I think about the task I'm avoiding? If I imagined a version of this task that felt completely aligned with my values, how would it differ from the current reality? What am I afraid might happen if I honored this feeling instead of fighting it? The answers will often reveal surprising insights about what your deeper self is truly seeking. When you begin to work with rather than against your unmotivation, you might notice subtle shifts, moments of unexpected clarity about your direction, a sense of relief as you stop forcing yourself along misaligned paths, or renewed energy when you redirect toward more authentic pursuits. These are signs that you're beginning to decipher the language of your soul. Now we arrive at a fascinating paradox that Kant's philosophy helps illuminate. The conventional view suggests that freedom comes from overcoming resistance and forcing yourself to be productive. But there's a deeper form of freedom that comes from aligning with your authentic nature. True freedom, as Kant recognized, isn't the absence of constraints, but action in accordance with laws you give yourself, laws that align with your highest nature. When you feel unmotivated, you're experiencing what appears to be a limitation, an inability to act. But this very limitation contains the seed of a greater freedom. By honoring this resistance and deciphering its message, you're not giving in to weakness, but rather developing a more sophisticated relationship with your own will. You're moving from what Kant would call a heteronymous relationship with motivation, one governed by external forces like social expectations or material rewards, to an autonomous relationship governed by principles that emerge from your authentic self. This shift transforms the experience of unmotivation from a frustrating roadblock to a sophisticated guidance system. The heaviness becomes a form of protection, the resistance a form of wisdom. This doesn't mean avoiding all difficult or challenging activities. Kant certainly believed in duty and effort. Rather, it means ensuring that your efforts are aligned with principles you could genuinely will to be universal, principles that honor rather than compromise your dignity. The signs of this transformation include a growing trust in your internal guidance system, less internal conflict around productivity, a natural motivation that emerges when you're aligned with your authentic path, and paradoxically, a greater capacity to persevere through genuine challenges that are aligned with your deeper values. Our modern society operates at a pace and with values that often contradict our deeper nature. We're surrounded by messages telling us to optimize, maximize, and constantly produce. This stands in stark contrast to the natural rhythms of creativity and growth, which include necessary periods of apparent dormancy. In this context, feeling unmotivated isn't a failure to adapt to modern demands. It's a natural response to an environment that often fails to honor human dignity and autonomy. Kant lived in a time that was just beginning to feel the effects of industrialization and the commodification of human effort. Yet his philosophy anticipated many of our current struggles by insisting on the absolute value of human autonomy and dignity. In a world where people were increasingly treated as means to economic ends, he maintained that each person must be treated as an end in themselves. This principle is revolutionary even today, suggesting that our value isn't determined by our productivity, but by our intrinsic worth as rational, autonomous beings. When you feel unmotivated in a world obsessed with productivity, you're not merely experiencing a personal failure. You're encountering a fundamental tension between modern values and the conditions necessary for human flourishing. By honoring your unmotivation as a form of wisdom rather than weakness, you're participating in a quiet revolution, one that asserts the primacy of human dignity over mere utility. If you've found value in this perspective and want to continue exploring the deeper wisdom behind your everyday experiences, I invite you to join our community by subscribing to this channel. We're on a journey of reclaiming our authentic relationship with ourselves in a world that often pulls us away from our center. Each week, we explore different aspects of this journey, from understanding our emotions as messengers to recognizing the wisdom in our challenges. This isn't about quick fixes or productivity hacks, but about developing a more meaningful relationship with your own experience. You're not alone in feeling these tensions between external demands and internal wisdom. Together, we're creating a space where we can honor the deeper currents of meaning in our lives and support each other in living more authentically. Subscribe now to continue this exploration together. What modern science has begun to validate, philosophers like Kant intuited centuries ago. Recent neuroscience research has shown that our decision-making processes involve not just rational cognition, but complex emotional and somatic markers that guide our choices. What we experience as unmotivation often involves the insular cortex and anterior cingulate cortex, brain regions that integrate physical sensations, emotional states, and cognitive assessments to evaluate the value and risk of potential actions. These systems can detect misalignments or dangers before our conscious mind has articulated them. Kant's conception of practical reason, which integrates moral intuition with rational principles, anticipated this understanding of how our moral and practical judgments actually function. This doesn't reduce our experience to mere brain chemistry, but rather shows how our physical embodiment supports the sophisticated ethical discernment Kant described. So, what if we completely reframed our understanding of motivation? What if, instead of seeing it as a resource to be maximized or a virtue to be cultivated, we recognized it as a natural response that flows when we're aligned with our deeper nature and ebbs when we're not? This wouldn't mean abandoning responsibility or effort, but rather ensuring that our efforts are directed toward ends that honor our dignity as autonomous beings. The next time you feel that heaviness, that resistance to action, try approaching it differently. Instead of immediately fighting against it, pause and listen. Ask what this feeling might be protecting you from or guiding you toward. Consider whether the path you're on truly aligns with principles you could will to be universal. Remember that your worth isn't determined by your productivity, but by your intrinsic dignity as a human being. This shift doesn't happen overnight. There will be days when old patterns of self-judgment emerge, when you fall back into fighting your unmotivation rather than learning from it. But with practice, you'll develop a more nuanced relationship with these feelings. You'll begin to distinguish between the resistance that protects you from misaligned paths and the challenges that accompany growth even on aligned ones. Perhaps most importantly, you'll discover that true motivation doesn't come from forcing yourself through willpower, but from aligning your actions with your authentic nature. As Kant might have put it, you'll move from a heteronomous will, governed by external forces, to an autonomous one, governed by principles that emerge from your highest self. The heaviness you've been fighting isn't your enemy, but your ally. The resistance isn't a weakness to overcome, but wisdom to be understood. In the apparent absence of motivation lies a deeper intelligence guiding you toward a life of greater meaning, integrity, and authentic freedom. What seems like stagnation may actually be the stillness from which a more aligned direction can emerge, like a compass needle that must come to rest before it can accurately point north.